You ever wondered how to make designs like this? Let me walk you through every step of the way. Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. I'm Duran with DuranSupply.com, where I help you design smarter, not harder. Let's make this design in Photoshop from start to finish. It's got a real cool sort of spiritual streetwear-esque vibe to it, and it's actually somewhat simple to make, so let's do it. All right, let's get right into it. So first things first, you know the deal. We're making a new document in my classic document size. If you're new here, that's 16 by 20 inches at 300 DPI. This is pretty much what I use for every design that I make, especially t-shirt designs. It's in 4:5 ratio, the perfect document size, and make sure that resolution is at 300 to ensure high quality on this. Let's go ahead and click create. I'm gonna turn this background black real quick with Command I. First thing I wanna throw in here is a silhouette of somebody. I actually just downloaded one right off of Google. You could literally search up man silhouette and you get a ton of interesting options, but I really liked this one right here because it looked sort of stock and just basic, which is what I want. So I'm just gonna drag this right into our Photoshop document. I'm gonna scale that up to size. This guy's like a little too buff. Like they made him really buff for some reason. I don't know why. I wanna make him like less buff. Anyway, you can see this is pretty low quality, but it doesn't matter too much. We're just gonna slap a Gaussian blur of this of a few pixels to sort of get rid of all that compression artifacts there. So maybe somewhere around 5 pixels just to sort of obscure those compression artifacts. And I'm gonna invert this with Command I to get this silhouette white on black. And then I'm gonna threshold this using a threshold adjustment, and I'll just play with it until I get the perfect silhouette. We can even make him buffer. Wow, look at that. That's a stocky man. Once you're done with that, let's do Command Alt Shift E on our keyboard to make a merge duplicate of everything on our canvas. And now we can delete these bottom 2 layers and we're just left with our silhouette here. We actually have that black background in it that we don't want. So I'm gonna take my magic wand by pressing W on my keyboard, select that black and just delete it out. Cool, so now we have just our silhouette on this canvas, but I actually wanna duplicate him and make 2 silhouettes holding hands. How are we gonna do that? Well, let's explore the puppet warp function in Photoshop. So that's in Edit, Puppet Warp. But before we do that, we want to make this a smart object so that it's non-destructive. So go ahead and right click on your layer and convert that to a smart object. Now let's go into Edit and Puppet Warp. So it's a little confusing at first, but basically you set anchor points, and then on these anchor points, you can also pretty much adjust or distort your layer in relation to the other anchor points. So this is really useful when you want to mess with some limbs and, you know, this is looking a little odd. Obviously, I'm just messing around here, but let's say you want to move someone's hand or arm a little bit. This function is really useful for that. So I'm gonna go ahead and reset that real quick. I'll go back into Edit Puppet Warp. We want to set an anchor on his head, on his shoulders, on his thighs here, basically everywhere where the joints would be on a person, just so that when we move the anchor on his arm, it doesn't move the whole rest of his body. So I'll put one on his right or left, I don't know which way he's facing, but his right or left arm here or elbow, around his feet as well, so those don't move, and then one on his chest right here. And now I can make another point on his wrist area, and if I drag this, I can effectively sort of move his arm around, and it looks actually pretty funny and kind of accurate at the elbow, which is pretty cool. So this doesn't look very much like he's holding a hand, so we're actually gonna undo that and sort of try to make it look like he's holding a hand. We're gonna duplicate this later and flip it so that he's actually holding another hand of some other person. It's gonna make his arm a little shorter as well, so it actually looks like a little bit proportional. And I guess the crease of his armpit would be a little higher now that he's reaching out his hand. So I'm actually gonna make a point there and move that as well. So yeah, I'm just gonna move this around until it kind of looks like an accurate depiction of someone reaching out for someone else's hand. We can also rotate these points by holding down Alt on a keyboard and putting our mouse or cursor in the radius of that point, and then we can just drag this to rotate that point however we want. All right, I think that looks all right. Now I'm gonna duplicate this guy with Command J, bring him over here and do Command T on my keyboard, right click and flip him horizontally. And now we can make these 2 men or 2 whoever hold hands. Obviously, this is not how hands are held. This is looking very funky. So I think what I'm gonna do is just bring in another silhouette of people actually holding hands and layer mask this part out and then replace it with the real silhouette of people holding hands, so it actually looks somewhat realistic. So I'm gonna put these 2 layers in a group, and I'm gonna name this silhouette holding hands. Gotta name our layers, guys. And now we can search up hands holding silhouette holding hands on Google and find one that we like. I actually found one earlier that was pretty nice. This one right here, I'm gonna drag that into my document. That is way too big. Let me scale that down to size, and I also need to invert it with Command I, and you need to select out that background too. So I'll use the magic wand by pressing W and layer mask out that background. The layer mask is actually going to get inverted, so I'm going to Command I that, so we just have the hands here. Then I'll try to place this neatly so that it actually looks like they're holding hands. So I'll make these hands a little bit smaller, and before I drag that in there, I'm going to make a mask on this group layer here. Take a hard brush, which is a brush on 100% hardness, so I'll bring that all the way up and then just paint out this little portion where those hands don't make sense, and I'm going to replace that with these hands down here. I'll go and drag this now all the way up to here. All right, now I'm going to warp it so that I can place this person's wrist a little bit more in line with our other silhouette here. I might even just erase that wrist out of this entirely and just paint in my own. Okay, I'm just gonna paint in my own. So I'll make a new layer here with a hard brush, choose white, and just paint that wrist where I need it to go. Okay, nice. Now these two are holding hands. Could be us. All right, now I'm gonna put all of these layers in a group. I'm gonna make that group a smart object so that we all pretty much consolidate all of this into one layer. And I'll name this our silhouette. Now I'll place that in the center of my document by doing Command A and then clicking on these two buttons up here to place it perfectly in the center. I'm gonna open up the layer styles of this and add a drop shadow. I want the color all the way at white. And I'm going to turn the distance all the way down, the spread all the way down, and the size all the way up. Press OK on that. And the goal here is to get some nice glow on these figures. Just using layer styles like drop shadow or outer glow isn't going to give us a really nice glow on these silhouettes here. So I'm actually going to use my film glow actions, which are free on my website. There's a section for freebies. You'll find it right there. It's called the distorted film glow actions. I'm going to open that up in my actions panel right here. So I'm going to run either one of these film glow actions real quick. But before I do that, I'm going to go and do Command Alt Shift E on my keyboard again to make a merge duplicate of everything on our canvas. And then I'm also going to go back to our silhouette layer here, bring the fill all the way back up and turn off that drop shadow. And I'll go into our layer styles and just add a black color overlay to this, which you'll see will come in handy later. Press OK on that. Go back to the top merge layer here and run either one of these film glow actions. I'm going to go for the blue tint one. Just press play on that, press continue. And then on these sliders, I want to turn the fuzziness most of the way up to capture more of that glow and the range a little bit down as well. All right, cool. I'm going to press OK on that and it's going to run that film glow across these silhouettes and it's going to make it look real nice. Okay, cool. Look at that. Much nicer glow here. Now we can delete this layer that I used for the glow. I'll set the actual glow group blending mode to screen, and then I'll put these two in a group with Command G, and I'm gonna name this silhouette. So now we have our silhouette all nice and glowy, and we also have that layer at the bottom of the group here, filling in the actual silhouette. So if I were to put things behind this or change the background even, we actually have that silhouette still intact. Now I wanna add some more sauce to this silhouette. So I'm gonna take that layer that's on the bottom of our silhouette group and hold down Alt and drag that above our glow group. And that's gonna duplicate it on top of that group. Now let's set the fill of this one to 0, head into the layer styles, turn off that color overlay. We're gonna add a stroke to this. Make sure the position is on center. I'm gonna turn the color black and set this to around, I don't know, 12, maybe 13 pixels. Then I'm gonna duplicate that stroke by pressing this add button here, set the color to white, and then make this one about half the size of that first stroke. Then I'm just gonna go on both of these strokes and turn the opacity down a little bit to maybe 60%, just so that it's not too heavy. Okay, this is looking really, really cool. Now I'm gonna duplicate the silhouette group. I'm gonna name this one Silhouette 02, and then I'll go in and delete that top layer that we made on the previous one. And I'm actually gonna send this one behind the first silhouette group. So I'll drag that below it and then scale it a little bit down and drag it down towards and sort of put it in perspective. We're going to duplicate these a few times to get a sort of perspective of these guys moving smaller as they get further back. So I'll bring this duplicate right around here, and then I'm going to do that 2 more times in perspective to get these guys sort of fading away from the view or the camera angle, you would say. So duplicate that again, go to the bottom one, scale that down a bit and move them back and away. Okay, and I did that 1 more time to get a total of 4 duplicates of these silhouettes moving back in perspective. I'm gonna put all of these in a group to be a little bit more organized. This is going to be our main subject of the design. Then let's throw in an image of some stars here. Again, I just found this on Google, or you could go to any stock image website and download a photo of some stars off of there. I like this specific one that I found on Google, so I'll drag that into my document here. And I want to make sure that the sky of this, or the dark black, mask here is actually pure black instead of this sort of off black. So you might not need to do this depending on your image, but in case your image is like mine and this is sort of an off black, just do Command L and bring in the blacks or the levels a little bit to make that sky sort of a pure black. I'll press OK on that. Now let's duplicate this layer with Command J, go up to Filter, Blur, and then where is it? Radial Blur. And we're going to set the blur method to zoom and the amount all the way up to 100. Also want to make sure the blur center is at the center. Then press OK on that. That's going to turn that normal image of stars into this really cool sort of movie-esque Star Wars sort of spaceship gliding through the stars image. Let's set that new layer to screen and then duplicate that a few times to make that effect brighter. And I also want the original stars we had at the bottom to be not so bright. So I'm going to go down to that first layer here and turn the opacity to, I don't know, 70-ish%. Then I'll put all of these in a group and I'll set that group blending mode to screen. I'll name this layer stars and I actually want to put it behind the second silhouette here. So I'm going to drag this star layer right below the second silhouette we made just to add some more depth to this composition. I'm also going to make a layer mask on this layer and take a soft brush, which is a brush on 0% hardness, just paint out some of these spots where these stars look unnatural. So sort of in these corners here or just around the edges where we can see them really starting to kind of take on a boxy shape. So I'll just paint around here with my soft brush to get it more of a natural looking shape. Can also duplicate the stars layer, make it into a smart object. I'll wait for this to load. Photoshop likes to take forever for things. Okay, I'll turn this duplicate layer into a smart object, and then I'm gonna go up to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and blur this by a good amount of pixels, maybe like 90 or so. That way we get a nice blur on this little starburst too. So I set that to 100 and that's looking pretty nice. But the colors here are actually getting a little bit distracting and we don't want to pay attention to the colors right now because we're going to do all the processing on this way later after the compositing is all finished. So I'm going to go on top of everything and add a black and white adjustment layer to sort of remove any of the color that we're seeing here. So we can just focus on the compositing and not worry about the blending of all the colors because that's going to happen later in this design. I'm also going to throw a levels adjustment on top of all this to sort of tighten up the contrast. So I'll bring the black in just a little bit, the white in a little bit, and drag the midtones down a bit as well. I might even go into the silhouette groups here and turn the opacity of the glow down a little bit just so it's not as prominent and sort of in your face. All right, we've got a real good base here. Let's continue. I'm gonna throw in an image of a planet here or any sort of cool circular object you can find. A planet is kind of the most fitting for this design, and I found a pretty cool image of Neptune on Google again, or you can go to any stock website. So I'm going to drag this image of Neptune into this document here, and I also want to mask out just the planet. So here's a little tip for that. When you're selecting a circle out of an image, go to your rulers, which is Command R on your keyboard, and drag a guide to the leftmost point of that circle and also to the topmost point of that circle. Then go to your elliptical marquee tool over here and place your cursor at the intersection of those two lines. Hold down Shift and then drag until you get the perfect selection of that circle. Then we can make that a layer mask on that layer and boom. Now we have this perfectly selected out of that image. I'm gonna bring this layer all the way behind our subject and scale it up a little bit more so it kind of looks like they're going into this planet, which is a really cool look. I'm also going to go into the levels of this layer with Command L and just turn the brightness down a bit because it's a bit too bright right now. I'm going to drag the black in a bit and the midtones as well. Then I'm going to go into the layer styles of this layer and add an inner shadow to kind of get a nice rim of light on this planet. So I'll set the blend mode to screen, the color to white, pretty much just turning up the size of it and playing with the distance a little bit as well. I can also play with the angle here. Okay, that looks good. Now I don't want the bottom of this planet to be too much in view, so I'm going to put this in a group with Command G, make a layer mask on that group, and then take a soft brush and just paint out sort of the bottom of this planet here and obscure that. Okay, we're getting real close here. Let's add some more nice touches to this. So we can even go into the subject group here, into our first silhouette group, and add some sort of fill into the silhouette if we really want to. So we could do that by, say, dragging an image in here, maybe of some stars, the same stars we used before even, and then layer masking that to the actual silhouette. So we can just grab a selection of our silhouette by holding down Command on our keyboard and clicking on that layer thumbnail, and then layer masking our image to that selection. And I also want to bring this behind the stroke layers here so that we keep that stroke in front. And now we have this image of stars inside of the silhouette here, which is pretty cool. We can also unlink this layer mask and move the image itself around if we want to do that. So here I've done the same with just some vertical lines. I could turn the opacity of this down too. Maybe that could be cool. So I'll just experiment with this and find something that I like. We can even throw in a new image in here of like a nebula or something. Anything really that you find cool that you think would look cool inside of these silhouettes. This is pretty damn cool, I would say. I might keep this. Okay, let's add some more finishing touches to this comp. I think some sci-fi like HUD elements would be really cool in this design. Whoa, what is this? A kit of 50 really cool sci-fi elements to use across your artwork? It would seem so. This is actually my new Sci-Fi UI Elements kit, and it's full of all these extremely cool and unique retro-futuristic HUD elements to use to spice up your artworks and give it that sort of techie sci-fi feel. This is a new release. It just came out, and you can get this on my website, duransupply.com, and hell, I'll even give you a discount code of 15% off using the code YouTube15 at checkout. I think this is one of my coolest products to date. There's about 50 of them. They've all got a really unique look, and pretty much anywhere you put these is going to really illuminate your designs. I've seen a lot of sci-fi HUD elements across the internet, but none like these. I think these are absolutely fantastic and a really easy way to add that sci-fi touch to your designs. Obviously, you don't need this for this design, but I definitely recommend picking up this kit. I don't even have much to say. I just want you to look at this. I'm going to start dragging a few of these into our other document over there. Some nice small touches like this element right here, or pretty much any of the ones in this top row. And I'll combine that with some more overarching elements like this third row here, and pretty much just see what looks good. I could drag this group into our design and place it wherever I want. Obviously, it doesn't have the color that it had in that document. That's because we have this black and white all the way on top. But again, color is something we're going to deal with later. So right now, I'm just going to drag this on top of my subject here and place it neatly. I'll just find a nice spot for this. I'm going to drag a few of these in here and get this composition looking right. I also want to add a drop shadow to this element here, and I want it to be pretty harsh. So I'll put the color on black, the spread on 100, and just crank up the distance a bit so we have a nice separation from the element to the composition. Okay, I've got a basic layout going. I'm going to add some more sci-fi elements into this now. I've got these small ones all sort of figured out. I want to add more of an overarching element to this. This one right here is one of my favorites. I'm going to drag that in there, put that into our document over here. And I actually want to drag this behind our silhouette. So I'm going to open up our subject group here and just drag this right behind our first silhouette to get some more contrast and depth going here. Can also add some supporting text in here. Place that neatly under our HUD element and maybe drag on the same layer style that I have on my elements. Okay, our composition is looking really solid right now. It's almost time to do processing on this, which is actually going to make it look good. But before I do that, now would be the time to add any branding or logos that I want to throw in here, or any extra text. Say if I'm doing this for my brand or another brand or an artist, I want to throw their logo or text in here, we could do that. I would personally place it right above this circle here. I think that would be nice to sort of top off the composition. I'll test it out here real quick as well. I'll throw in one of my old logos here for my brand, bring that on top, and just throw one of the layer styles I had from the HUD elements on here. That looks pretty nice. And I can even throw in another element from my HUD kit here, maybe one of these longer ones down here to sort of frame that text. So here's what that would look like. Also, check this out. Here's something really cool we could do with this text or logo. We can take our text or logo, do Command J to duplicate it, and rasterize the bottom layer. Then let's add a color overlay. I'll go to rasterize layer style right there. And then I'll go to filter, blur, radial blur, make sure we're on zoom blur, put the amount to around 60 or so, and then change the blur center from up here to somewhere around down here. Then I'll press OK on this dialog. And once it renders, we have this really cool light effect going on our text. Now I'm just going to drag this layer down a bit to sort of match with the edges of our text. I'm also going to scale it down a little bit so it's not bleeding out the edges of our text or logo here. And that gives it sort of a really cool 3D look. Might even want to layer mask this just a little bit so it's not bleeding into, you know, all the rest of the composition. So take a soft brush, just paint out some parts of it so it's not too heavy. Okay, now we've done all the compositing. It's time to make it actually look sick as fuck. We have a few options for processing here. We can use any of my signature tone products to make this process really easy. But if you don't have anything like DEPTHTONE or VINTONE or DITHERTONE, you can also use the filter gallery. So I'm going to run through a couple of those options here, but first up, let's start with the filter gallery, just in case you don't have any of my templates. And of course, this is the free option, so it's budget friendly. But then we're going to check out things like my DEPTHTONE template and DITHERTONE to compare. So once we've got everything all figured out, I'm going to put all of this in a group with Command G, and then do Command Alt Shift E on my keyboard to make a merge duplicate of everything on my canvas. Then I'll turn this layer into a smart object and go up to filter, filter gallery. We want to add the grain filter on here. That's in the texture category in filter gallery. Make sure the contrast is around 50 and the intensity you could play with. We're going to come back to this later, but these are the basic settings. Then on top of this grain, go ahead and add a diffuse glow that is in the distort group. Let's turn the graininess down a bit, the clear amount down a bit, and the glow amount up. Quick side note, before you do this, you actually want to make sure your colors are set to the default colors, which is black as the primary and white as the secondary. So press D on your keyboard to reset that. Then go up to filter gallery and you could copy these settings. We're going to come back to this diffuse glow later, but for now, make a new filter with this plus icon at the bottom here, and then go to sketch and then stamp. From here, let's turn the smoothness to around, I don't know, something really low, like 2 or 3, and the light/dark balance all the way down to 1. And then we want to go back into the grain effect layer here and crank up the contrast until we get all these little specks out of the image. So crank up that contrast a bit until those start to disappear. Around 70 did the trick for me. Then I'll go back into this diffuse glow effect and play with the glow amount and the clear amount until you get sort of a really blown out effect on your design. You want this to be basically brighter than it should be. Bring the glow amount up a bit and the clear amount down. And that's going to make this whole thing really, really bright and blown out, which is what I'm going for. And after I've done that, I'm going to press OK. Then I can open up the layer styles of this layer, add a color overlay, set the blend mode to multiply, and set the color of this to something pretty dark. Just for now, I'm going to set it to a dark, nice toned blue right here. Press OK and all that. Then we're going to duplicate this layer, open up the color overlay and set it to something a bit lighter. So maybe around here. We're going to come back to this later. Again, don't worry about this too much right now. Press OK on both those. Then go back into the filter gallery by double clicking on that smart filter right there. And now we can go into the stamp, turn the light/dark balance up a bit. Now we're going for more of a normal brightness level, sort of the mid-tones. So I'll turn that diffuse glow off, then I'll crank down the light/dark balance on the stamp a little bit so that we get sort of a middle of the range brightness on this design here. Right around here looks good to me. Then I'm going to take my magic wand tool by pressing W on my keyboard. I'll select the black background here and create a layer mask on this layer. Then just invert that layer mask with Command I, and boom, look at that. Now we added some tonal depth to this design. We can add another layer here of highlights and go back. Say if we duplicate this layer, delete that layer mask, go back into the filter gallery and just turn this light dark balance up a ton until we get pretty much only the specular highlights of this design. So only the really, really bright whites, and then press OK on that and repeat the process with the layer mask. So select the black background, make a layer mask on this and invert, then change the color to something lighter, like, I don't know, light teal or something. Okay, and boom, after I messed with some of the colors here, this is looking pretty damn good using just the filter gallery and stacking up some of these tonal levels on top of each other. So we got the shadows layer here, the mid-tones layer, and the highlights layer on top here, and getting the appropriate colors on each of those tones, as well as adjusting the stamp filter. We get this really, really cool 3-color design here. We can mess around with the colors as much as we want. We can even turn off the shadows and highlights to just have this 1-color design, which is also pretty cool. Now let's check out what this could look like if we use things like DEPTHTONE or DITHERTONE. So I've got DEPTHTONE open here. All I'm going to do is go into my artwork smart object down here and insert my artwork. So I'll go into this place art in here folder, delete this sample art, go back into our document where we composited this graphic and take our merge duplicate of everything or even the whole composite into DEPTHTONE. So I'm actually just going to drag this entire composite group into the artwork smart object in DEPTHTONE, and this is going to allow us a lot of flexibility and customization to finish off this design and make it look the best we could possibly make it. So now we have the whole composite of that design in the DEPTHTONE smart object. I could choose if I want either a halftone or a grain pattern on this. So using the grain is going to get us sort of that filter gallery look that we just had, that sort of Xerox grain feel. I'm going to test that out first, and we also have some textures embedded in the smart object on top of this design. So these are textures from my warm plastisol texture kit, and these samples are included in DEPTHTONE, and this is just going to add that vintage texture on top of our design. Now I'm going to save this smart object with Command S, and once I switch back into our DEPTHTONE master document, we now have this design with all the processing on it, that really cool Xerox grain look, and we can go in now and adjust the intensity of all the tones, like the shadows, the mid-tones, the highlights in real time just by playing with the threshold slider here. And I of course can change the colors as well to get them more like what we had them before. more with the blue tones. So this looks super cool, and the beauty of DEPTHTONE is that it makes that processing to finalize your design super easy and streamlined. Changing the colors here is super easy. You just open up this colorful layer, change the color to whatever you want for the respective tone. And we can change the intensity of all the tones very easily as well, just by messing with the slider in the threshold dialog here. I can even go back into the smart object down at the bottom here and change the Xerox grain pattern to a halftone pattern just by turning off this grain, turning on the halftone, and then saving the smart object. So here's what that design looks like with the halftone pattern instead of the Xerox grain. Very different texture and feel on the graphic now. Still looks extremely cool, and changing the look of it from that Xerox grain to this halftone pattern was obviously super simple. Just click on a layer and save the smart object. And also the beautiful part about this is that you can now go back into the composite group in the smart object and change anything about the design that you want to change. And all you have to do to see that effect take place is save that smart object, which is a much easier workflow, I'd say, than doing that whole filter gallery process again and again. But of course I wanted to include that filter gallery option in there as a budget option, because that's free, and my DEPTHTONE template and DITHERTONE, which I'm going to use in a second here, is not free. But obviously I made these products for a reason, to speed up your workflow. So I would definitely recommend picking up DEPTHTONE, which I'm showing you right now, and DITHERTONE, which I'll show you in just a second. But yeah, let's say I want to change the fill of these guys from that nebula to that line pattern that I tried out. I could just go back into the smart object and then open up my composite group, which has all my layers in here, and then change that fill from the nebula to this line pattern that I tried out. Save the smart object and then watch that effect take place back in the parent DEPTHTONE document. I think I'll stick with the nebula fill, but again, it's really cool to be able to change things about your design and not have to painstakingly redo all the processing effects on it, like this Xerox grain effect. So here's the DEPTHTONE halftone look on this design. Here's the DEPTHTONE grain look on this design, and here's what we did earlier with the filter gallery. Now let's try out one more fun option that we have for the final processing on this design, and that is DITHERTONE. DITHERTONE is a set of actions that does that processing on your designs, and it gets sort of a similar look to this in terms of the shadows, midtones, and highlights being separated out and colored individually. But instead of having that halftone or Xerox grain texture on it, it's actually bitmapped, which gives it a super fantastic look. And it's one of my favorite things to do with a design. So I'm going to show you how we can work with that right now. So on the raw merged composite layer here, I'm going to go into my DITHERTONE actions here and click on this first action, which is going to separate all the tonal channels, which is going to be your shadows, midtones, and highlights. So I'm going to run that first action. It's going to ask me to choose my background color. I choose black. Then it's going to have the levels preset for me for each tonal channel. So for the shadows, it makes the design a lot brighter. But if I want to, I can go in and change the levels of this if I want more of a brighter or more intensity in those shadows. I'm just going to leave it as it is right now. Press OK on this. Same deal for the midtones. For the midtones, you want a pretty neutral look on your design, not too bright, not too dark. And then again on the highlights, it's going to set that levels up to something really contrasty to get just those pure highlights in the design. And then it's also going to do a channel for specular highlights, which is those pure whites. So you want this to be like all the way in, very contrasty, just those pure whites, pure highlights of the design. And now we have all our tonal channels here, the specular highlights, the midtones, and the shadows. And now we can run the bitmapping action on all of these separate tonal channel layers to get that bitmap look on all of them, to separate all of them out and color them individually. So we want to start up top here at the specular highlights. We have a few options for the size of the dither or the size of the bitmap. So the smaller the number here in the actions panel, the bigger the bitmap texture is going to be, and the bigger the number, the smaller the texture is going to be. I don't want to go too deep into that because this is not, a demo for DITHERTONE, but you're going to catch on pretty quickly to what this does. So I'm going to choose the diffusion level 40 here for a pretty exaggerated effect. I'm going to go ahead and run that on the specular highlights. It's going to automatically bitmap that layer, and then we just have to run that action on all the rest of these layers here. And you see it automatically selected the next layer for me. So I can just click. I'll click on this action again for the highlights, and the same thing for the midtones and the shadows. Okay, we've got all our tonal channel layers bitmapped, and as you can see, this just looks super cool. The bitmapping effect is one of my favorites. Now it's time to delete the black out of all these layers and color them individually. So again, I'll start at the top layer here, go down to the delete black action, and just run that 4 times to get the black out of all 4 of these layers. So I'll play that, it's gonna hit the next layer for me. Play that, it's gonna delete the black, select the next layer again and again. And now I can go into the color overlay of all of these layers and set that to whatever color I want. Okay, boom, now this looks really cool. I love the way the bitmaps adds this really unique texture to the design. This is obviously a bit of an exaggerated effect. I used one of the the lower levels here, so the bitmapping texture is really prominent, but I went ahead and ran that again using the diffusion level 72 to get more detail in the design, and this is what that would look like. All right, now quickly to compare all the different processing effects that we tried on that raw composite. This is the first one we did, the filter gallery. Really nice Xerox grain on this. Definitely give this method a shot if you don't have DEPTHTONE or DITHERTONE yet. Now this is that same design run through DEPTHTONE instead. So this is the raw composite just placed into DEPTHTONE, and using the Xerox grain processing effect within DEPTHTONE. Pretty different look we have on these two graphics, so just goes to show you how that final processing can affect your final design. You might prefer this one, you might prefer this one, or either way, the kind of processing you choose is the pretty much overarching factor in how your design is going to look, besides from obviously the compositing and formatting of your design. And here's the grain from DEPTHTONE compared to the halftone effect from DEPTHTONE, and then here's that DEPTHTONE halftone compared to DITHERTONE, which is that bit mapping look. So these are all really cool and obviously all different effects that you can try on your design. I'm a huge fan of this process that is compositing all of your design without color, just focusing straight on composition and blending in your different elements together. Tonally, no color involved. And then once you've got all that foundation laid down, you can go ahead and do the final processing on that composite to make that design, actually look pretty good. And you can use any of the methods I displayed here to do that. I would recommend DEPTHTONE personally for this process because it was formulated for that process. So you do all your compositing in the smart object of DEPTHTONE, and you could save that smart object and adjust your design as needed in real time. But obviously all of the options here are very good. Pick what you like, pick what you can afford. Otherwise, that's a wrap. I really enjoyed taking you along every step of the way of my design process. Here's our final results for this design. You can pick up my Sci-Fi Elements kit, DEPTHTONE or DITHERTONE on my website to enhance your design workflow. That is duransupply.com, and don't forget to use the discount code YouTube15 for 15% off of your order. Thank you so much for watching. If you learned something from this video, like the video. If you like me, subscribe to the channel. I post videos like this every week to help you become a better designer. I'll see y'all in the next one. Peace out.